Everything that we consume has the ability to help us or harm us. In today's video, I'm going to share some foods that may be causing us harm, a bit of the science behind it, and what to eat instead. Sound good? I've been living well with my MS for almost 2 decades now, and part of how I do that is by avoiding foods that may cause us harm. When it comes to neurological diseases like MS, there are poor diet and lifestyle choices that are linked not only to the worsening of our symptoms, but possibly one of the reasons we're getting sick in the first place and the progression of our disease. In this review on the role of diet in neurological diseases, they say this: diet and inflammation are interconnected and play a crucial role in the development of neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, schizophrenia, bipolar disease, and depression. Dietary factors have been identified as key modulators of inflammation. A diet rich in whole foods, including fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and lean protein sources, has been associated with lower levels of inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein and interleukin-6. Conversely, a diet high in processed and high-fat foods, refined carbohydrates, and red meat has been linked to increased inflammation and a higher risk of chronic diseases, including neurological disorders. Yup, it makes a difference what we eat. I'll put links to all the papers and research that I cite today in the description below if you would like to check them out. This review goes on to say that presented data shows that consuming a diet abundant in fruits, vegetables, nuts, herbs, spices, and legumes that are sources of anti-inflammatory elements such as omega-3 fatty acids, polyphenols, vitamins, essential minerals, and probiotics, while avoiding foods that promote inflammation, create a positive brain environment and is associated with a reduced risk of neurological diseases. Okay, so lots of fruits, veggies, nuts, herbs, spices, and legumes. Excellent. But what should we avoid? First is ultra-processed foods. These are the foods that have a long shelf life. We mainly find them in packages that have long lists of ingredients that we don't recognize as food. In order to increase the shelf life, improve the appeal, and increase profitability, ultra-processed foods contain little to no naturally occurring ingredients. Preservatives, stabilizers, emulsifiers, solvents, and binders, along with bulking agents, sweeteners, sensory enhancers, flavorings, and colorings make up the majority of an ultra-processed food's constituents. Yeah, it's not really food anymore. It's food-like product. These are ruining our gut microbiomes and our health. And we're eating more and more ultra-processed foods. The consumption of ultra-processed foods increased among all U.S. adults from 2002 to 2018 from 53.5% to 57%. Nearly 60% of the foods that we're consuming are ultra-processed. So that's the first food to avoid. Stay away from ultra-processed foods. Try to eat foods with one ingredient, like apples or broccoli or beans. Or if you need to buy packaged foods, look at the ingredients list and make sure that they're all recognizable food ingredients, like these veggie burgers or these snack bars. The next food to avoid is highly processed carbohydrates. Notice I said highly processed. Not all carbohydrates are created equal. When we process carbs like wheat into flour, we remove a lot of the fiber and the nutrients. An inflammation-promoting diet is a high intake of refined carbohydrates such as white bread, white pasta, and sugary drinks. These foods cause a rapid increase in blood sugar levels, leading to the release of insulin. Prolonged high insulin levels can contribute to the development of insulin resistance in tissues, which is one key factor in the pathogenesis of inflammation. MS is an inflammatory disease, so if we can reduce the risk of inflammation, we may do better in the long run. This review goes on to say, according to studies, consuming high glycemic index foods frequently is positively correlated with having higher serum levels of inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein, TNF-alpha, and interleukin-1 beta, inflammatory cytokines, whereas a large intake of dietary fiber has the opposite effect. Okay, so high glycemic index foods are out and high fiber foods are in. Instead of drinking things like apple juice or soda, we should eat apples. Instead of eating things like white pasta, we should look for whole grain or high protein pastas. Eating whole, real foods will increase our fiber and nutrients and decrease inflammation. Next is saturated fats. Eating a diet high in saturated fats has long been associated with worse outcomes for people with MS, and there are volumes of long-term, large peer-reviewed studies showing that saturated fats are linked to other diseases as well, and people with MS are more prone to these diseases. Let's start with the research of Dr. Roy Swank. Between 1945 and 1948 in rural Norway, the frequency of MS was found to be directly related to the amount of saturated animal fat consumed daily in different areas of the country. This led Dr. Swank to start looking at how lower fat diets may help people with MS. He recruited people with MS and had them change their diet to a lower saturated fat diet and followed up with them not for 1 or 2 years, but for decades. In 1991, it was reported the striking result that approximately 20% of these MS patients on the lowest fat diet showed little to no neurological deterioration as a result of the progress of the disease. This is much higher than the percentage of the 4% of benign cases that could be expected within a large group of patients. Yes, this is great news. Any of you want little to no neurological deterioration over the decades? And in this study that had over 2,000 people with MS that looked at the association of diet with quality of life, disability, and relapse rate, they found that the association between MS risk and diets high in saturated and animal fats and low in polyunsaturated fats has been observed in multiple ecological studies. And case control studies also support trends towards higher MS risk for greater saturated fat and meat consumption, while vegetable protein, dietary fiber, and certain micronutrients appear to be protective. So less foods with saturated fats and more foods with polyunsaturated fats, fiber, and micronutrients. I will also take a moment to address the carnivore diet, as it seems to be gaining in popularity right now. I've looked for research to support this diet, but all I've been able to come up with is anecdotal evidence. There are several large social media influencers out there that are sharing the benefits of this diet, but it's not backed by science. I will say this, though. It is the ultimate elimination diet. So if someone goes from eating the standard Western diet that's full of highly processed, highly inflammatory foods to the carnivore diet, they may initially feel better. They're getting rid of all those additives that are making them feel terrible. Also, on this diet, many lose a lot of weight, and being overweight is associated with inflammation and worse outcomes with MS. So initially, it may show some improvements for people with MS. Unfortunately, there's ample evidence that the carnivore diet is no good for us. In this article from McGill, which is a group of well-respected scientists and researchers, they say that beyond the anecdotal evidence of miraculous effects of an all-meat diet, science does not back up the other claims of the carnivore diet. And it goes on to say that the carnivore diet is not just risky because it's lacking important vitamins, nutrients, and fiber. It can also cause serious digestive issues and can elevate LDL cholesterol and increase the risk of heart disease and cause high blood pressure and put extra pressure on our kidneys. No, thank you. In another article from the Harvard School of Public Health about the carnivore diet, they say, by skipping fruits and vegetables, people likely won't get enough fiber in their diets, which can affect gut health. They will also miss out on carotenoids and polyphenols, substances with antioxidant properties. Gut health has been in the news a lot lately when it comes to autoimmune diseases like MS, and I did a video on gut health that I'll link above and below if you would like to check it out. Next is trans fats. Trans fats are fats that have been altered so they're more shelf-stable so foods don't go bad as quickly. A hydrogen gas is added to liquid fats to help them become more solid and more stable. These fats are found in prepared foods like baked goods, including cakes, cookies, pies, and crackers, also in fried foods like French fries, fried chicken, and donuts, and in margarines, spreads, and shortening. In this review of Diet and Multiple Sclerosis, they say this about trans fats. High intake of saturated fatty acids lead to a dysbiosis of gut microbiota. Additionally, the consumption of vegetable oils, which have been enriched with trans fatty acids, is associated with gut inflammation and the upregulation of pro-inflammatory cells. Like I mentioned earlier, there's an association with our guts and MS and inflammation in MS, so we need to avoid trans fats if we can. They've actually been banned in some countries because they're so harmful to our health. The review goes on to say a diet enriched with vegetables, a high amount of fiber combined with probiotics, vitamin D and vitamin A supplementation, and lipoic acid result in gut eubiosis. This leads to an increase in microbial diversity and microbe-associated anti-inflammatory mediators such as short-chain fatty acids. And conversely, a diet rich in animal fat and trans fatty acids, also including sugar and salt intake, promotes gut dysbiosis and results in an increase in the presence of pro-inflammatory mediators and also in gut barrier and blood-brain barrier permeability, resulting in central nervous system autoimmunity. We need to protect our guts and our beautiful brains. I know. I'm asking you to give up some of your most favorite foods. But try to think of it as swapping out foods that may increase our symptoms and progression for foods that reduce our symptoms and reduce the risk of progression. Think of it as taking exquisite care of our central nervous systems. Some healthier alternatives are dates, nuts, fruits, or an ice cream made with frozen bananas, or even homemade baked goods that are made without the harmful fats. I use the Forks Over Knives website for a lot of recipes that are really delicious and healthier than the store-bought foods, and I'll put a link in the description below to their website. Next is sugar. Sugar is found in a lot of our foods, and it's known to be inflammatory, and it likes to hide in foods too. Many foods that you wouldn't think have added sugars do, like ketchup, pasta sauces, salad dressings, yogurts, and foods that are flavored, like flavored chips. It also likes to hide behind different names, like corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, rice syrup, fructose, sucrose, maltose, and dextrose. Look for words that end in OSE on those ingredients lists. In this paper on sugar and inflammation, they say this about sugar and MS. Although the effects of a high sugar diet on MS has not been confirmed in clinical studies, it has been found that high glucose and high sucrose diets can aggravate the disease progression of experimental autoimmune encephalomyelitis, a disease model of MS. This is the version of MS that mice get that's used in a lot of the research done on MS. Instead of using sugar in baking, try substituting applesauce or mashed bananas. And when craving a sweet treat, try to go for fruits. Going back to the review that I shared earlier in the video on the role of diet in neurological diseases, they say this at the conclusion. A healthy diet that's rich in nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids, antioxidants, and fiber can support the growth of beneficial gut bacteria and help reduce inflammation, which is a key contributor to the development and progression of neurological diseases and malaise. A diverse and healthy gut microbiome can help to promote the production of neurotransmitters, regulate inflammation, and support the integrity of the blood-brain barrier, all of which are essential for maintaining optimal neurological health. The data we collected shows that by taking care of a healthy diet and a diverse gut microbiome, the individual can actively support their neurological health and reduce the risk of developing neurological diseases. We are not at the mercy of our diagnosis. There are things that we can do to help promote our health and well-being with our MS or other chronic conditions. Avoiding highly processed foods, simple carbohydrates, saturated fats, trans fats, and sugar can help. Will you or have you changed your diet to remove foods and food-like products that are unhealthy and add foods that promote neurological health? Let me know in the comments below. To see more on anti-inflammatory diets, watch this video next. And until next time, be well.